What is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that happened to you that you still think about to this day? Story 1. A few years ago, I was at my lowest point in life. Several people close to me had passed away unexpectedly. I was being bullied every day at my job, and my life was falling apart. I was beyond depressed. I just couldn't imagine waking up another day. So I had planned my exit. I bought a one-way plane ticket, got sleeping pills, and wrote a series of goodbye letters. On the day I was supposed to fly out to carry out my plan, there was a terrible accident on the freeway to the airport, and it was shut down both ways. I ended up pulling into a nearby pub to have a drink and wait for the traffic to clear. The moment I sat on the patio with my beer, a man asked if he could sit with me. I said sure, not really caring. He then told me that whatever I was planning was a terrible idea and that I would regret it. I was startled. How did he know? He said he could tell I was in pain but believed I had an amazing life ahead and that this was not how my story should end. He asked me to hand him my keys and wallet, promising to return them after I talked, and he listened. So I opened up. I told him everything. My pain, my past, the reason I was heading to the cemetery across the country where my family was buried. He listened quietly, then he pulled out a lighter, asked me to take out the letters and help me burn them. He told me I was valuable and that after I finished my drink, I should go home and get some rest. He said I'd be okay tomorrow, and I believed him. He gave me back my keys and wallet, and I left. I went home and hugged my family. I got some sleep, and the next day I began working on myself, found a therapist, got a new job. Years later, I'm in a much better place, far from where I was that day. No one in my life knows how close I came to ending it all. That stranger somehow understood and saved my life. I never saw him again, and I don't even know his name. It's the most inexplicable thing that's ever happened to me. I think about him every day. Thank you, kind stranger, for saving my life that random September day on a pub patio. Story 2. I had a neighbor who was around 30, and he was such a kind and warm person. Let's call him Adam. He felt like the older brother I had always wished for. He was good at everything: fitness, singing, playing instruments, dancing, sports, and cooking. He used to take me and my younger brother to the beach whenever he could. This happened 3 days before my 14th birthday. I was on my way to school when I suddenly had a vivid image flash in my mind. It was Adam in a car accident, and he didn't survive. It felt so real that I nearly cried, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just because I'd watched a movie with a tragic scene the night before. I went about my day, and around 8 p.m., my parents got a phone call. I saw the expressions on their faces change. After the call, they said they had to go somewhere and would be back soon. I didn't know what was going on, but something didn't feel right. The next morning, I woke up to the worst news of my life. Adam had passed away in a car accident the night before. He died instantly. I didn't know how to process it. A few hours before it happened, I had that terrible feeling. I couldn't sleep for days, and I blamed myself, thinking maybe if I had said something, he might still be alive. It's been almost 7 years, and every time I think about it, it still breaks my heart. I truly wish he were still here. I still can't explain why I had that feeling just before it happened, and honestly, it scares me. Story 3. Driving home from work late one night, I noticed I was being followed, and it felt very off. I had just left the hospital and turned off the main road onto a few side streets I usually took. A car behind me made the same left turn and sped up to get directly behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then I briefly considered stopping at 7-Eleven for food and turned on my right signal. But I remembered I had food at home, so I turned the signal off. The car behind me did the exact same thing. Signal on, then off, right after I did. That's when I got nervous. I turned my right signal on again, and so did they. Instead of turning right, I turned left at the next intersection, even though my signal was still indicating right. They turned left too. They kept following me through a bunch of random turns. Finally, I turned onto a cul-de-sac I knew about, thinking I could loop around and try to see the driver. As I approached the end of the street, they seemed to realize what I was doing. They stopped suddenly, did a quick U-turn, and sped away. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. It was definitely unsettling. Story 4. I used to work in a nursing home where I cared for patients with dementia. Every person on my hallway had a habit of stealing spoons from dinner to give to the kids because they like shiny things. I had to go through every room once a week to collect the spoons back. I asked about these kids many times, but never got a real explanation. I'd hear things like, they just live here, or they stand outside in the snow and look in the windows, or they're my friends who visit. It wouldn't be so strange if it was just one or two people, but nearly every patient did it, at least the ones who could still talk. One night around 3 a.m., one of my patients started screaming, so I ran into her room. She was lying in bed, seemingly fine. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "That boy's here again and won't get out of my closet. I'm scared." Honestly, I was scared too. It was one of the most unsettling moments I experienced there. Story 5. I was about 7 or 8 and at a housewarming party for my aunt and uncle's new place. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest mobile home in South Carolina. It was a small gathering with some barbecue in the backyard, red Solo cups, and boxes still packed in the garage. The only things in place were the basic furniture pieces. 2 of my cousins were there, and 1 had a friend over. We were playing some kind of fantasy game pretending to be princesses. All the adults were outside drinking, and only 4 of us kids were inside. Me, my 2 cousins, and the friend. The house layout was such that the kitchen was at the front door, followed by the living room, then a hallway with the bathroom and bedrooms. I was in the living room on the couch, which was our pretend bedroom. I was just sitting there while the others got snacks. Suddenly, without warning, we all heard a blood-curdling scream from the bathroom. It was clearly a woman's voice, and it was so loud and terrifying that I jumped. My cousins and their friend ran in from the kitchen and looked at me in shock. Then we all rushed into the bathroom, but no one was there. Nothing was moved, and barely anything had been unpacked except for some toilet paper. Just as we turned around, about 3 adults came rushing in from the backyard. They had heard the scream too, and it definitely came from inside. To this day, we still don't know what it was. We've speculated that maybe it was a prank, but it would have been nearly impossible. Someone would have had to sneak into the bathroom without being seen, scream, then either run out the back door without any of us noticing, or exit through a bedroom window. But those were all locked from the inside. My uncle even checked for hidden speakers, but found nothing. The adults think one of us screamed and lied about it. We think it was something supernatural. Regardless, the party ended on a weird and somber note. No one was smiling after that. It was just unsettling. Story 6. In my final year at university, I lived in a 4-bedroom house with a ground floor and 2 upper floors, each with 2 bedrooms. My friends had the first floor bedrooms, I lived on the second floor, and the room next to mine was empty because the guy who had rented it was staying with his girlfriend. I don't think he ever actually slept there. Both my room and his had small crawl space cupboards in the corners. One day I came home from university to find my friends discussing strange noises, like footsteps, they had been hearing coming from my floor during the night while I was asleep. I laughed because apparently these noises were loud, and yet I had heard absolutely nothing. Not believing them, I offered to go check the crawl spaces. We went upstairs, and the moment I opened the door to the empty room, the door to the crawl space in the corner of that room suddenly slammed shut. We freaked out. There was no reason for that door to have been open in the first place. We grabbed kitchen knives, locked ourselves in one of their rooms, and waited for another friend to come over and check the cupboards and attic. We never did figure out what caused the noises, but it was hands down the scariest thing that happened during the entire year we lived there. Story 7. I have a strange memory that doesn't feel like it belongs to me. In it, I'm a small boy dressed in a suit and tie, attending what seems to be a formal event in a large ceremonial church or similar place. It's daytime, and sunlight is streaming brightly through the windows. There are many adults dressed in elegant black clothing. They all form a circle, and in the center, an older couple is dancing to classy, refined music. I remember trying to look at them by peering between people's legs. Suddenly, the man collapses. There was no gunshot, no visible cause. He just fell. Immediately, everyone started screaming. The women ran away, but the men rushed toward him. I think I was knocked down in the chaos because I remember lying on the floor and then everything going black. That's all I can recall. The weird part is this memory has been with me since I can remember, but I've never been to any fancy event in a church when I was young, and I have no idea who that man was or what happened. It creeps me out because I know, deep down, that this memory isn't mine. Story 8. I was at my best friend's 18th birthday party, which was held at her older brother's house. He let us use the place for the night. We're Muslim, so there was no alcohol, no smoking, or anything like that. There were around 10 of us, and the party started at 11 p.m. Around 3 a.m., one of our friends said he felt unwell and asked if he could lie down. My friend showed him which bedroom to use. He came back just moments later and said he couldn't sleep there because there was already a baby sleeping in the bed. We were completely confused. None of us had children, and neither did her brother. We decided to check it out, and there really was a baby there. My friend who was hosting tried to wake the baby by gently touching him, but it didn't work. We were all frightened but agreed to let the baby rest for the time being. We returned to the living room and tried to figure out how a baby ended up there. We even called her brother. About 30 minutes later, the baby suddenly started crying. I had never been so scared in my life. We all went to the room and tried to calm him down. We fed him, and he eventually fell asleep again about 30 minutes later. We returned to the living room. At around 5 a.m., while cleaning the house, one of our friends suddenly screamed, "Where's the baby?" We all rushed back to the bedroom, and the baby was gone. Just gone, like he had never existed. My best friend turned 23 last December, and to this day, none of us have any idea where that baby came from or how he disappeared. Story 9. I had a schnauzer who could hear a cat walk across a Persian rug. The slightest noise would wake her from a deep sleep and set her barking instantly. She was the perfect companion for camping trips. Bears, raccoons, and skunks all got fair warning if they came near our site. One morning, deep in the backcountry of southwest Colorado, we woke up after an uninterrupted night. I noticed that the central guy line of my tent was no longer staked down with the aluminum stake I had used, but instead with a piece of aspen branch carved into what looked like a tiki statue. It wasn't overly elaborate, but it had a snarling face with teeth carved into the bark, and it had clearly been burned to give it a dark brown color. My dog hadn't made a sound, and apparently I had slept more deeply than I thought. I scrambled out of the tent, scanned the area around the small alpine lake, and saw no other campers, no sign of anyone having been nearby. I cut the trip short and hiked the 8 miles back to my car. There wasn't a single vehicle in the trailhead parking lot. I still don't know who or what left that stake. Story 10. Years ago, we had a rescue dog, a terrier mix. We lived in the countryside on a wooded hillside with about 5 acres of wild woodland and fields. This dog loved exploring the woods and chasing rabbits, but always came back home quickly. One day, though, she went missing. We searched with our other dogs but found nothing. A friend brought his dogs to help. Still nothing. We put up posters, searched for 6 days straight, and finally started losing hope. On the 6th day, I had a strange gut feeling about one specific area we had already searched multiple times. I grabbed a sickle and some gardening gloves and began hacking my way into the center of a massive bramble patch. It was summer and the only sounds were birds and insects. Then I heard a muffled yip. I called her name and heard her again, this time more excited. She was underground in a rabbit warren. I stayed with her, calling to keep her calm until help arrived. The local fire brigade was kind enough to assist, and we eventually got her out. She ran around like a wild muddy puppy. The vet said she was okay, likely surviving by getting moisture from mud. I'm not usually one for intuition, but I just knew in my gut she was there. There's no real explanation for it. Story 11. When I was in 3rd grade, I moved to a new town and into a new house. We lived in a camper in the backyard while we renovated the house, which was quite old. During renovation, we found all kinds of things in the walls: old bottles, a pair of glasses, letters, newspapers, and pictures of children in school clothes. It was a 2-story house, and the stairs became the center of many creepy events. At the top of the stairs, there was a small landing leading into 2 bedrooms. At night, we always left a light on in the landing, in case someone had to use the bathroom. My brother and I shared a room, and our older brother had the other. I was so creeped out that I refused to sleep upstairs and always slept downstairs on the couch. One weekend, my older sister came to visit and was in our older brother's room alone while we were at school and our mom was at work. As she sat there watching TV, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs and called out, thinking our mom was home early. There was no reply, just the sound of footsteps turning and going back down. When she got up to check, no one was home, and all the doors were locked. It didn't end there. Later, our oldest brother stayed home alone, while the rest of us went on a week-long vacation. Naturally, he had his girlfriend over to keep him company. One night around 3 a.m., she got up to use the bathroom downstairs and said she heard children whispering. A few nights later, around 3 or 4 a.m., she woke my brother saying someone was in the house. They heard footsteps on the stairs. Since the light was on in the landing, they could see a shadow under the door as if someone was standing there. The doorknob started shaking, but thankfully the door was locked. They panicked. My brother grabbed one of those decorative samurai-style swords, not sharp at all, and went to check. They heard more footsteps running down the stairs and he followed. The house was empty. All the doors and windows were closed and locked. He called the police, but nothing ever came of it. Story 12. I was probably around 14, sometime in the early 90s. We were traveling from Texas up to Tacoma, Washington. We were nearly out of money, almost out of gas, had no food, and were stuck in Chico, California. I stayed in the car while my mom took my younger sisters to the restroom at a gas station. I was overwhelmed with anxiety, staring down at my hands, when suddenly the car door opened. A woman with brown hair, who looked kind of like a TV mom, sat down in the seat and faced me. She said, "It seems like you're down on your luck. Take this and give it to your mom. Tell her to pay it forward someday to someone who needs it." I looked down and saw a $100 bill in my hand. When I looked back up, she was gone, completely vanished from the parking lot. I cried. When my mom returned, I told her what happened, and she cried too. We got gas, bought a bag of oranges from a man on the roadside, and went to a nearby park with a spillway dam. We swam and ate oranges for a few hours before getting back on the road. That lady, whoever she was, saved us. We made it to Tacoma and started a new life. Thank you, mysterious kind stranger. We never forgot your generosity. Story 13. This didn't happen directly to me, but I experienced some weird consequences from it. My best friend and his mom were moving out of their house, and they were the only two who lived there. On moving day, he decided to take one last selfie in his room. When he showed the picture to his mom, she asked, "Who is that?" Looking closer, he noticed what looked like a white mask-like face peering over his shoulder from the attic hatch above. He had always heard strange noises from the attic but never saw anything. Until that picture. A few weeks later, we went on a wrestling trip and stayed in a hotel. He showed the photo to everyone in our room, and then things started getting spooky. We heard knocks on the door, but when we opened it, no one was there. We saw flashes and glimpses of what looked like a figure in the mirror. Everyone was freaked out, and some thought it could be whatever was in that attic photo. My friend became so paranoid that he started playing recordings of Bible verses at night, hoping it would keep anything bad away. He said ever since he took that photo, strange things had been happening to him. Story 14. My grandma and I both once saw what we believed was a dead person in our laundry room. The laundry room connected to the kitchen through a doorway, which also connected to the living room. One afternoon, my grandma needed a hamper, so I followed her to the laundry room. The moment we stepped into the doorway, we both saw it. It appeared to be about my height, I was 6 or 7 at the time, and was completely black, not like a person with dark skin, but literally covered in a black, shadow-like texture. It was slumped near the washing machine. We saw it for just a split second, long enough to register it was there, and then it was gone. I remember my grandma asking, "Did you see that?" and laughing nervously. She got the hamper and went about her task, but I avoided the kitchen for a long time afterward. As a side note, I used to have some of the most intense and disturbing nightmares in that house. They were so frequent and graphic that my pediatrician recommended therapy. To this day, I've never been able to explain what we saw, but I'll never forget it. Story 15. I was driving home from work on a long, somewhat dark road. I'll admit I was tired and cold and just wanted to get home. The speed limit was 60 miles per hour, and I was doing closer to 70. Suddenly, a girl with long blonde hair, a black coat with brown fur on the hood, and jeans appeared right in front of my car. I had noticed a black car stopped on the road ahead just moments before she appeared. I managed to swerve around her, totally shaken. I turned down a side street and pulled over to process what had just happened. Then I saw a tall man with short hair and a black coat get out of the driver's side of the stopped car. He grabbed the girl who was trying to resist and dragged her back into the vehicle. I called the police immediately and gave them a description of the car and the direction it drove off in. I never heard anything back from them. It's been 2 years and I still think about that girl. I hope she's okay, wherever she is. Story 16. In college, I was roommates with my childhood best friend for about 2 years. We trusted each other completely and would go into each other's rooms freely to borrow clothes, perfume, or whatever we needed. Just a knock if one of us was inside. Our rooms were across the hall from each other, and the hallway faced the kitchen, so from the kitchen, you could see both doors. At the time, my friend had long black hair and very fair skin. One day I got home from work with my headphones in, talking to my mom on the phone. I went to the kitchen to grab a snack, and I saw my friend walk out of her room, go into mine, come out, and return to hers. She looked like she had just showered, wet hair and a white towel wrapped around her. I remember her hair especially clearly. She didn't make eye contact, but that wasn't strange. I didn't say anything because it was normal for us to borrow each other's stuff. I stayed on the phone, got my snack, hung up, and went to my room to relax. An hour later, I went to the kitchen again, and she was there making food. I asked her what she had grabbed from my room earlier, and she looked at me confused. I explained what I saw, and she said, "Are you sure you saw me?" I told her yes, without a doubt. That's when she told me to grab my phone and come to her car right away. She grabbed her purse and my keys from the counter and pulled me outside. Once we got to the car, she told me she had just gotten home 5 minutes before our conversation. She had spent the night at her boyfriend's place and hadn't been home all day. I'll never forget the fear on her face. She called the police, and they came with the apartment manager. They searched the entire place thoroughly and found nothing. The manager had maintenance change our locks and gave us new keys on the spot. My friend then admitted she had been hearing noises from her bathroom for the past week, things like bottles clinking. But nothing was ever out of place. I don't know who or what I saw that day, but it looked exactly like my friend. I don't use substances, I don't take any medications, and I wasn't sleep deprived. It happened in 2014, and it still gives me chills whenever I think about it. Story 17. Back in 2008, I lived near my college in an apartment set far back from the main road, surrounded by wooded hills. One evening, I went out for a run near sundown. As I approached the bottom of the hill behind my apartment, near the end of my run, I looked up and saw 3 guys on bikes just sitting at the top. Being a 20-year-old female, my instincts kicked in, and I felt uneasy, but I convinced myself I was overreacting and kept running. Halfway up the hill, the guys were still there facing me. I had no phone, no alternate route, so I told myself I'd run as hard as I could and scream if necessary. Suddenly, a German shepherd appeared, running alongside me. I'd never seen the dog before, but somehow I just knew I would be okay. As we neared the top of the hill, the dog moved in front of me, slightly ahead, and when we got to the guys, he stopped in his tracks. I kept running, passing them without making eye contact. Once past them, the dog caught up and continued alongside me until I reached the well-lit parking lot of my apartment. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he disappeared into the trees. I took the same route at the same time every day for weeks afterward, hoping to see him again. I never did. My friends are convinced he was a guardian angel. I'm not really a believer, but it was one of the creepiest, strangest, and most amazing things that's ever happened to me. Story 18. Once I was hired to load firewood into my aunt's basement. She lives alone and left the basement door open for me while she went out. I usually push the interior basement door wide open when I enter, and it almost never closes fully on its own. But once, as I was about to grab another load, I heard the door close behind me. I turned around and saw that the deadbolt had locked. I had my arms full of firewood and couldn't have locked it myself. I checked out the window and looked in the garage to see if she had returned, but she wasn't home. The door was in an enclosed area, so there was no wind that could have shut it. I tried various ways of slamming the door to see if it could lock on its own, but nothing worked. It's a remote house. I would have heard if someone drove up, and it's highly unlikely anyone would walk over just to lock the door without making any noise, especially with the wooden steps that creak when someone's on them. To this day, it's the only time I've ever seen a deadbolt lock itself, and I still have no explanation. Story 19. A few strange things happened to me and my housemate when we moved into the top apartment of an old building in Europe, located right next to a forest known for local legends about witchcraft. The town even had a witch-themed parade every year, just a playful tradition. The apartment was massive, 3 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, a study, 2 living rooms, a kitchen, 2 balconies. The larger balcony was upstairs across from the attic door, which led to a huge dark space full of century-old items. Porcelain, old wooden furniture, and a creepy doll neither of us wanted to touch. There were also children's slippers and black and white photos of a child from the days when the town still used ox carts. It was a great place to live, and the cheap rent made it even better. But we were definitely a little uneasy at first. We used to hear odd noises, banging, footsteps, or things falling on the carpet. My housemate would text me, "Did you hear that too?" But eventually she stopped mentioning it, as if talking about it would make it worse. I'll never forget the first time I was home alone. It was winter, so it was already dark at 4 p.m. I left all the lights on to make myself feel better while going out for groceries. I couldn't find my earphones, so I left without them. When I got home, every light in the house was off, except the one in my room, and my earphones were neatly rolled up on top of my bed. Other weird things happened too, like light bulbs in the hallway popping one by one, or my housemate texting me to let her sleep because she heard a dog scratching at her door. While I was at a friend's place, one time I heard loud banging from a door while I was in the bathroom, and it stopped immediately the moment I flushed, as if it didn't realize someone was home. The place always felt cold. We stayed there for a year, and while nothing truly terrible happened, the whole experience still gives me chills. Story 20. My girlfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship, and we usually take turns visiting each other between Australia and Canada. About 2 years ago, it was my turn to visit her. She and her mom lived together, and her room was an extension built onto their garage, so to reach it, you had to walk through the garage. A couple of weeks into my stay, I woke up around 1 a.m. to find the entire room glowing red. When I looked up, I saw a black figure crawling through the ceiling. The way it moved was unnatural, as if it was breaking every bone in its body just to move. I screamed, which woke up my girlfriend. She looked up, saw it too, and started screaming. I instinctively threw my pillow at the figure, and then everything went black. I woke up hours later, my girlfriend asleep, and thought maybe I had just dreamt it. I got up to use the washroom and tried to quietly open the garage door, since her mom had previously complained about the loud click waking her up. As I slowly opened the door, her mom suddenly started screaming. I panicked, thinking she was angry at being woken up, and I ran back to the room. I woke my girlfriend and told her. She got up to check. About 20 minutes later, she returned pale and silent. She asked if I had seen the red glow in the figure. When I said yes, she looked terrified and said she thought it was a dream too. Then she told me her mom wasn't screaming at me. Apparently the door had woken her up, but when she opened her eyes, there was a black figure standing at the foot of her bed, slowly moving toward her. She blacked out and didn't wake up until my girlfriend entered the room. After that, we all slept with the lights on for an entire month. Story 21. I'm generally a skeptic when it comes to ghosts or anything supernatural, but one experience from middle school still puzzles me deeply. My family was camping in New Mexico near a beautiful stream. My parents had one tent, and my brother and I shared another. As I was getting ready to sleep, I had my headphones on. I decided it was time to rest, so I took them off and started drifting off when I suddenly became very aware of a noise, a light swishing or scratching sound against the side of our tent. I assumed it was grass brushing against the fabric. Then I realized there was no wind at all. I asked my brother, "Jay, what is that?" He asked what I meant, so I pointed out the noise. He hit the side of the tent, and immediately something hit the tent back from the outside. We both started screaming hysterically. Our parents came running while the sound continued. They insisted it was probably a bug or maybe something brushing the tent. They got a flashlight and inspected the outside. There was nothing there. They shook the tent, brushed down the walls, and took everything out, but the noise persisted. I was so scared I slept in my parents' tent while my dad took my place. That night, my brother and dad reported that the scratching continued. I still don't have an explanation. It didn't make sense then, and it still doesn't now. Story 22. I went to UVA during the time Morgan Harrington disappeared. which was my second year there, sophomore year. Sadly, because she wasn't a student, she had come to town for a Metallica concert. Her death was sensationalized but didn't strike fear into the student body like Hannah Graham's disappearance would 5 years later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. About a week after Morgan's disappearance in 2009, my friend, a guy, and I were at a grocery store near campus getting snacks around 10 p.m. Bus service had ended, so we used a cab service UVA provided to ensure students could get home safely, even if they were drinking or just needed transportation. UVA paid up front and charged the student later. We got into a cab and the driver immediately brought up Morgan's disappearance. That wasn't strange. Everyone was talking about it. It was all over the news. But I'm an introvert with a very good memory, and I remember just about every conversation over 3 minutes long, especially with strangers. He started discussing police theories, and my friend, who later earned a master's in Gothic horror, talked about how some people speculated that a cult was involved. It was speculative, kind of dark, but casual. I remember the driver looking at me through the rearview mirror. I won't say I never forget a face, but the conversation and his look stuck with me. We got home safely and didn't think much more of it. Fast forward 5 years. I'm in grad school 1,000 miles away, and Hannah Graham's disappearance is national news. This time there's surveillance footage. You can see her walking away with a large African-American man with dreadlocks. They ID him and his face is everywhere. I don't recognize him. Eventually he's caught in Texas, not far from where I was in school. As more details emerge, they report that his DNA matched samples found on Morgan's remains, which had been discovered 3 months after her disappearance. Then they show an older photo of him from 5 years earlier. No dreadlocks, trim beard, about 40 pounds lighter, and my heart drops. I'm 97% sure he was the man who drove us home that night. He lured both Morgan and Hannah using his cab. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been with my male friend that night. What if he'd been a girl? Would I have made it home? Story 23. It wasn't the scariest thing ever, but when I was 11, my family moved to another town for my dad's job. We were only going to stay for a year, and we were assigned a house in a gated community of around 20 homes built for Army officials and their families. One day my parents went out and took my baby sister with them. My older sister was at a friend's house, so I was left alone with our dog for a couple of hours. I was playing in my room when I remembered that my black socks for my Monday uniform, a formal outfit we had to wear, were drying in the backyard. I went out there with the dog and casually said out loud, "I wish there was something to do." Not even a second later, I heard a young voice clearly say, "Then let's play." I turned around and saw my usually hyper golden retriever just sitting there calmly as if nothing had happened. I completely freaked out, ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom, turned on the TV, and hid under the covers until they got back. When they arrived, I was sweating, scared, and paranoid. They never figured out what had happened but tried to comfort me. What still gets to me is the layout. Every house was surrounded by 3-meter-tall cinder block walls. The place where the socks were hanging was right next to the wall, separating us from a house that had no children. The other nearby house was more than 20 meters away, behind another wall. Behind our house, there was nothing but a steep hill. No one could have said that. I still think about it, and it freaks me out every single time. Story 24. About 10 years ago, I was dating my ex, who had extremely strict and deeply religious parents. The only way we could spend time together in private was for her to sneak out through her bedroom window at night. We usually met halfway since she was scared. One night she called to say she was already on her way, which surprised me because we hadn't planned to meet. But I didn't think much of it. Our relationship was still new, and I was excited to see her. Then things got weird. My cat blocked my door, like really tried not to let me leave. I ignored it, went downstairs to put on my shoes, and the cat kept following me, meowing nonstop. I put my keys on the shoe shelf, slipped on my shoes, and when I reached for the keys, they were gone. I searched everywhere while my cat kept going wild. 5 minutes later, she called again, saying she was outside waiting. I was shocked at how fast she'd gotten there. I told her I lost my keys and suggested we just chat until I found them. But she grew impatient, eventually yelling at me to open that door. Her tone became angrier and her voice started to sound off. She screamed one last time and hung up. I was panicked, trying to understand what was happening. Just then, I turned and saw my keys, right where I had originally left them. I opened the door and looked outside. No one. Thinking she got mad and left, I went back inside and called her. She answered. I asked why she had left. She said she never called me that night and had never left her house. To this day, I can't explain what happened. That night still haunts me. Story 25. IF27 was training to become a nurse. Here in Germany, part of our education involves practicing in different healthcare facilities. I was working at a hospice, a place where terminally ill patients stay until their final days. I was in my final year of study and had been assigned there for 8 weeks. One day I was doing my rounds, checking in on patients to ensure they were comfortable, didn't need anything, or simply wanted someone to talk to. One patient, a woman who had been there for a few days, began breathing differently. I recognized the signs and called for her husband, who was waiting in the communal lounge. He came and held her hand during her final breaths. It was peaceful, and I knew she had passed. Just then, one of the phones rang. A patient was calling for assistance. I took a deep breath, excused myself, and went to answer the call. I walked into the room and smiled. "How can I help you?" The man inside told me his guest wanted to know where the exit was. I was confused. He hadn't had any visitors that day. I asked, "Who do you mean?" He replied, "This lady here. She wants to know where she can get out." I turned pale. My stomach dropped. I stuttered while pointing. There's the way to the balcony. Then right, then left. Down the stairs is the door. I'll get you some water." I left the room, barely able to breathe, and leaned against the wall. I stood there for 5 minutes. A nurse saw me and asked if I was okay. When I told her what happened, she simply smiled and said, "Yes, that kind of thing happens a lot here." A few hours later, I asked the man if his guest found the way out. He replied, "Yes, she did. She said thank you for everything." I had to process that for days, weeks, months. I still can't fully believe it, but since then, I've been sure we carry a soul. And yes, some other eerie things happened to me and my colleagues while working in the ICU too. Story 26. My brother, our friend, and I were driving through Vermont on our way to a cabin for a snowboarding trip. I was sitting in the passenger seat when I noticed a bright red light in the sky. It was nighttime. The light seemed to be coming from deep within the woods and formed a massive dome shape. What was strange was how the light stayed contained within the dome and didn't seem to travel beyond it, even though it was extremely bright. We were so puzzled that we pulled over at a small gas station nearby to get a better look. There were about 6 locals there, also watching the light. They told us there were no buildings, factories, or anything else in that area. As we all talked, the light slowly started to dim. Then it suddenly imploded and burst outward with a massive white flash that lit up the sky and surrounding forest. About 10 seconds later, a strong gust of wind hit us from the direction of the light, maybe 15 to 25 miles per hour, based on what I've experienced while hiking. The light gradually faded, but it didn't fully disappear for about 10 minutes. We all got back in our cars and continued on, still trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. Story 27. Back in high school, probably my sophomore year, my friends and I used to sneak out late at night. We'd meet up at the school campus and mess around, vandalizing, smoking, just doing typical reckless teen things. One night we met up at the baseball field dugout to smoke and hang out. While we were there, we noticed a strange light appear in the adjacent dugout. At first, we figured it might be a janitor or school security guard. We kept our eyes on it, but it started moving out of the dugout and toward ours. Then it appeared in the center of the baseball field, where the lights made everything visible. But we didn't see anyone holding the light, just the light itself, growing brighter as it came closer. It seemed to float. Once I realized there was no person attached to the light, I turned to my friends, only to find they had already taken off running. I quickly grabbed our stuff, shoved it in my backpack, and ran. I looked back as I was getting away and saw the light pass through the 2 fences we had to climb over. That's when I really started panicking. I sprinted to catch up with my friends, and we ran for about half a mile until we lost the light in a nearby neighborhood where one of us lived. We hopped into his backyard to hide. To this day, we still have no idea what it was. I only saw it once more, while running on the school's track. It was by far the scariest thing any of us ever experienced, and we weren't easily scared. We'd played with Ouija boards, gone ghost hunting, and more, but nothing ever shook us the way that floating light did. Story 28. For the first year and a half of college, I worked the evening shift, 3 to 11 p.m., at a small-town hotel that was run by my best friend's mom. The laundry room was connected to the main office, and since it opened into the hallway, we usually used it as a shortcut when checking on a guest room. Everyone would leave by 8 p.m., and the evening shift worked the last few hours alone. The hotel mostly served business travelers who stayed for a week at a time, so it was generally quiet. On my first night working alone, a housekeeper jokingly warned me about a ghost that haunted the hotel. I laughed it off. Later that night, I used the laundry room shortcut. I was halfway through when every single washing machine and dryer turned on at once. I ran out of there instantly. I didn't mention it to anyone and convinced myself there was some timer setting I wasn't aware of. I didn't have any more strange experiences until a year and a half later, on my last day working there. Earlier that week, a guest had made me uncomfortable. He was embarrassed to borrow a plunger, but instead of returning it at the front desk, he walked in silently through the unsecured laundry room and placed it in the middle of the back office without saying a word. Because of that, I kept the laundry room door shut from then on. On my final night, during the last hour of my shift, I suddenly heard what sounded like 3 drunk men arguing in the laundry room on the other side of the door. It was loud, complete with the clinking of beer bottles, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I called my best friend, who was also the night manager, and he could hear the voices arguing through the phone. It all felt surreal, but even though I knew it wasn't the smartest idea, I opened the door to tell them to quiet down or go to bed. The second I opened the door, the voices stopped. The room was completely empty. I brushed it off. But the fact that both my first and last shift included bizarre, unexplained events still gives me chills. Story 29. I was pulling an all-nighter with my now ex-girlfriend in the living room of my parents' house, where we lived at the time. It was around 5 a.m., and my dad came out of his bedroom and walked past us on his way to work. He stopped to chat with us for a minute or two, but something about him seemed off. I couldn't quite explain it. It was just a feeling. Maybe he was more tired than usual. After the quick conversation, he left the house. Not even 10 minutes later, he came out of his bedroom again, dressed for work. You know those movie scenes where the main character sees something shocking and the camera zooms in as they gasp and whisper, "Oh my God!" That was me. My body went numb, and I was instantly filled with panic. I asked him if he had just left and come back, but he looked confused and said he had just woken up. This time, he seemed completely normal. I still can't explain what happened. It wasn't from lack of sleep. I've pulled plenty of all-nighters before and after this without anything like that ever happening again. I don't search for answers. I've chalked it up to a glitch in the system, a shift in timelines, or something beyond our understanding. Whatever it was, it deeply rattled me, and I still think about it to this day. Story 30. I moved into a new house in the UK after a separation, so I was living alone. A few strange things happened, like knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night that would wake me up. Eventually, I moved to the bedroom at the front of the house, and the knocking stopped. My bedroom was at the end of a short corridor, with the light switch for the upstairs lights located just outside the door. I'd turn them off, go into my room, and because I had blackout blinds, it would be pitch black. I clearly remember turning off the bedroom light and using the screen of my phone to find my bed. I got into bed, cozy and lying on my side trying to drift off. Maybe 10 minutes later, I heard a loud click right outside my bedroom door. It sounded exactly like the light switch. I sat up and there was light shining under the door from the hallway. I've never felt fear like I did in that moment. I kept thinking, that light can't turn on by itself, but I would have heard someone. I searched the whole house, even though I knew no one was there. I turned the lights off again and went back to bed, promising myself that if it happened again, I'd leave immediately. Thankfully, it didn't, but I eventually decided to move. Still, I think about that click and wonder what was going on in that house. Story 31. Every Christmas, my high school friends and I would have a night out. One year after going back to one of the guys' houses, we were all drunk and having a good time when one of the lads suddenly pointed into the kitchen and said, "Who's that?" The kitchen was small and box-like. You could see the whole room from the doorway. I had my back to the kitchen wall, so I turned to look. The lights were off and no one was there. We all looked and asked what he meant, but he just kept pointing and saying, "No, who are those two there?" The guy who lived in the house turned on the light, and again the kitchen was empty. We asked if he was okay, and he said, "That guy is leaning on the worktop, and the other is pointing and laughing at me." He was calm but insistent. We kept telling him we didn't see anything. He continued to describe them, what they were wearing, how they stood. Then suddenly, when he realized we couldn't see them, he started freaking out. He became visibly shaken, tearing up and trembling so badly that we had to help him put his shoes on because he wanted to leave the house. After he left, the rest of us just chalked it up to him having a weird moment. No drugs involved, just alcohol. But the guy who lived there later told us that the one who had the vision described his uncle and grandfather exactly, how they used to stand and what they wore. Both had passed away years before. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been there. I still think he just had some kind of strange mental break, but the whole situation was genuinely unsettling. He refuses to talk about it to this day. Story 32. When I was a kid, I lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and sister. For some reason, I used to sleep on the couch in the living room, wake up at around 3 a.m., watch anime, get ready for school, and then sleep a bit more. I honestly don't remember why I did this routine. One night I was awake, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., and suddenly someone started banging on the window and screaming hysterically. It scared me beyond belief. The banging and screaming lasted for a couple of minutes before it just stopped. What's really bizarre is that it didn't wake up my mom, my sister, or even the neighbors. When I asked them the next day if they had heard anything, they all said no. Maybe it was just my imagination or some unstable person outside, but I'll never know. Another incident happened when I was in middle school, and we lived in a house in the middle of nowhere. It was a weekend, and I was sleeping in. My parents always hated that and constantly tried to wake me up. One morning I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Wake up." I immediately opened my eyes expecting to see my mom, but no one was there. I thought maybe someone had been there a few minutes earlier, and I had just now woken up. Later I asked my parents if they had tried to wake me, and they both said no. I still don't know if I was dreaming or imagining it, but it creeped me out. Story 33. A lot of weird things have happened to me in life, so either I'm haunted by some mischievous spirit, or strange things just happen around me, and I'm too clueless to make sense of it. I've picked 3 specific incidents that I absolutely can't explain, and other people witnessed them too. The first happened about 15 years ago at a friend's apartment. We were watching TV and talking, and the conversation turned to ghosts. I said I believed there was more to the world than we understand. She laughed and said she didn't believe in any of it, and then jokingly called out for any ghosts to show themselves. A few seconds later, we heard a heartbeat-like sound, steady, rhythmic thumping. We looked around and quickly realized the sound was coming from my purse. It was sitting on the table in front of us and literally pulsating like a beating heart. I grabbed it, emptied it out, and we couldn't find anything that would cause that sound. The second event happened around the same time at a different friend's house. He had told me before that he often heard footsteps in his living room, but I assumed it was just creaky floors. One night my sister and I were there and we heard it too, clear as day. Heavy footsteps, like someone wearing boots, walking from the kitchen into the living room and stopping right in front of the couch where we were sitting. The third story happened when I was living with my dad and sister. One night my dad and I were watching a movie in the living room. My sister was studying in her room. From our angle, we could see the hallway starting from her room and ending at the office, where the family computer was. We both saw my sister walk from her room to the office. Then a couple of minutes later, we saw her do it again. Same direction, same pace. My dad and I looked at each other, confused, wondering when she had gone back the other way. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, my dad called out to her, asking if she was in the office. She walked out of her room and said no, she'd been in her room the whole time. We never figured out who or what we saw walking that hallway. My dad still says it's the strangest thing he's ever experienced. Story 34. My friend was drunk and asked me to come pick him up. He wasn't far from where we lived, but to get there, I had to cross several really large intersections. They're busy during the day, but pretty quiet at night. On our way back, we reached one of those intersections. This one was at an angle. You couldn't see far to the left, but the right was more visible due to the way the roads intersected. There were also a lot of trees blocking visibility on the left. The light turned green, and I intended to accelerate, but I couldn't. I was frozen there long enough for my friend to notice and ask, "Why aren't you going?" I answered, "I don't know." Just then, a car came flying from the left, running the red light at high speed. The timing was so precise it probably would have T-boned my car. We sat there, stunned, trying to process what we had just witnessed. We both saw it, and we later told ourselves maybe we had an angel watching over us. But to this day, what creeps me out most is how I couldn't physically move my foot to the accelerator, like something was stopping me for a reason. Story 35. When I was about 12, I was the last one in the barn at night, turning off the lights. As I started walking out, I suddenly got an intense, overwhelming feeling, like someone was right behind me, or like something terrible was about to happen. It was mid-January, freezing cold and windy, and all the horses began freaking out in their stalls. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind and that horses get skittish, but it kept escalating. I ran to my horse's stall for comfort, planning to warm up next to him before walking home. But he pushed me to the back of the stall, which is usually a dangerous spot to be in, even with a horse you trust. But I felt like he was protecting me, and I didn't resist. I stood there beside him, heart pounding in the near darkness. When I tried to move or peek out, he blocked me with his head and pressed his shoulder gently against me, as if to keep me from looking. After a while, I don't know how long, the other horses started calming down, and my horse finally moved aside and nuzzled me, like he usually did when asking for affection. That's when I knew he was letting me go. I sprinted over a mile home through the dark, slipping on the ice but never stopping. I still don't know if there was someone in the barn or if it was something else entirely, but I truly believe he was keeping me hidden. That night still makes me sick to my stomach when I think about it. If you ever get a bad feeling and the animals around you do too, trust it and get out of there. Story 36. I've had a few strange experiences in life, as most people do, but this one stands out as the most vivid, the most concrete. It's the only time I've ever actually seen something with my own eyes. It happened about 22 years ago when I was 8. My little brother and I lived with our dad in North Alabama, while our mom lived with her mother in Chickamauga, Georgia. We didn't see her much due to issues with custody and her inconsistency. Chickamauga is a historically significant Civil War site, home to one of the bloodiest battles and the biggest Union defeat in the Western Theater. There's now a massive park covering the area, and my grandma's house sat right on the edge of it. Locals never talked about it much. It was just part of the area's history. People flew kites in the fields and visited the old stone tower nearby. One year around Christmas, we were at Grandma's for a party. The tree was up in the living room, and later that night, my mom pulled out the couch for my brother and me to sleep on. My cousin slept on the floor. I went to bed and woke up in the middle of the night, feeling strange and frozen with fear. I couldn't move, either from sleep paralysis or fear, and when I looked toward where the Christmas tree had been, it was gone. In its place stood a soldier, rugged, dirty, in old-time military clothing, holding a long gun. He stood completely still, staring straight ahead. I didn't move. I don't remember what happened next, whether I passed out or fell asleep again, but at some point I turned toward my brother and saw that his head had turned into a dog's head, like an actual, realistic-looking dog's head. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe too many balloons from the party made me lightheaded, or I dreamed the whole thing, but I still have no real explanation. That night remains the most bizarre and vivid memory of my childhood. Story 37. At the age of 12, I embarked on a 3-week journey to England with a group called People to People. During the last week, we found ourselves back in London, lodged in a hotel I vaguely recall still featuring fire escapes on the exterior windows of the rooms. As night fell, the chaperones would verify our presence in the rooms and then affix tape across the outside of our doors as a means to detect if anyone had slipped out. That particular night, my roommate Ryan and I drifted off to sleep after the room was checked. At some point during the night, I woke up, and I was completely naked. That wouldn't normally seem unusual to me, given my history of sleepwalking and sometimes undressing during sleep. But this time, I felt an overwhelming and unexplainable fear deep inside me, like I was in real danger. Without thinking, I ran. I ran through the hallways of the hotel, completely naked, and somehow, even without looking at room numbers, I just knew I was on the wrong floor. I got in the elevator, went back to what I somehow knew was my correct floor, and found my room. The tape was still perfectly in place on the door. Ryan answered, completely confused. He had no idea how I'd gotten out, and neither did I. I put my pajamas back on and went to bed. I thought maybe it had been a dream, but I woke up wearing a different shirt. The first thing Ryan said to me that morning was, "How did you get out of the room last night?" He tried telling other kids at breakfast, but a few said it was impossible. I told him to drop it, and he seemed frustrated by that. I still don't know how I ended up on another floor or whose room I had woken up in. The only person who might know anything is Ryan, but this was in 2005, and there was no social media to keep in touch. I don't remember his last name now, but even 15 years later, it still haunts me. Story 38. About 4 years ago, I worked for the conservation department in a nearby town. My job focused on invasive plant removal and trail maintenance. I was often alone in the woods because I knew what plants to look for and was trained in maintaining trails. I worked Monday through Thursday from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., so I wasn't out there at night, and there were usually people nearby throughout the day. One afternoon in late August, I was walking a trail deep in the woods. I had hedge trimmers with me, pretty solid tools, and since the town was fairly affluent, I never felt unsafe, even as a small woman working alone. It was near the end of the workday, and I was just walking, not actively trimming. I hadn't seen or heard anyone in quite a while. As I approached a bend in the path, a large shrub blocked my view. I was about 20 feet from it when suddenly the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat. I trust my instincts now. I had a traumatic experience in the past from ignoring them, so I dropped my hedge trimmers and ran. I sprinted straight back to my truck. It should have taken me 20 minutes, but I made it in 10. At the start of the run, I could hear something behind me, but I didn't look back. I drove straight to town hall, said nothing, and went home. The next day, my boss told me I wouldn't be working the trails alone anymore. A jogger had passed through the same trail later that day and found 6 mutilated cats behind the shrub I had nearly reached. Story 39. About 10 years ago, I accepted a job in Bolivia and needed several vaccinations to meet the visa requirements. Like many Americans at the time, I didn't have health insurance, so I went to one of those Med Plus clinics attached to certain locations of a major grocery store chain. I called ahead and drove an hour to one location, only to find out I'd been misinformed. They were out of the vaccine. They sent me to another store about 30 minutes further away, assuring me they had a dose set aside. When I got there, they were out as well and referred me to a third store, another 40 minutes away. Frustrated and hungry, I went to the store's deli and ordered a chicken tender lunch with mashed potatoes and corn. They packed it into one of those white clamshell containers, printed a barcode sticker, and sealed it over the lid. As I reached to take it, I decided last minute to add a deep-fried burrito, one of those bright orange ones soaked in grease. I watched the employee peel the label open, add the burrito in its paper sleeve, then reseal the box with a new barcode printed on another sticker. This all happened right in front of me. I was the only customer, and they were the only employee there. They partially covered the old label with the new one. When I went to the register, the cashier scanned the top label, and it only rang up as the price of the burrito. I had this sudden gut feeling, one of those rare moments when you feel like reality is watching to see what you'll do. I knew the total was wrong. I could have spoken up, but I told myself it wasn't a big deal. The chain had already wasted hours of my day, and it was just a $10 difference. Still, it felt off. I drove toward the next store, still trying to get my vaccine. About 20 minutes later, stuck in traffic, I decided to grab the burrito to eat. I peeled back the label, opened the box, and it was gone. That didn't make sense. I checked again, dug through the tenders, poked around in the mashed potatoes, even though there was no way it could be hiding in there. I pulled off to the side of the road, opened the box fully, and shifted all the food from one side to the other. Still nothing.